We need a government that can fit inside of our Constitution.
If you clicked in here, you probably are wondering, like I did for many years, why there's so many liberal and statist Republicans in the Republican Party. When I was involved in the Republican Party years ago, I was shocked that if you said anything constitutional whatsoever, there was a huge majority of the Republicans who just instantly disliked you. And if they thought you were conservative in any way, you were kind of set off to the side, like they didn't want anything to do with you, like you were some sort of plague. And that always kind of confused me, because in the beginning of, following politics, you watch Fox News and stuff like that, and they make it just seem like, hey, all you gotta do is vote Republican and, the whole world's gonna be fixed. Well, that's just not the case. But anyways, I have the secret. And I've actually known this for quite a few years. I have written emails and stuff about it in the past, but I decided to put it in a little bit bigger forum. Hopefully it can get out to everybody. But what it is open primary crossover voting. The Democrats are picking the Republican candidates in a lot of races throughout the country. So you can see, there's a lot of states that have open primaries. And if you kind of just glance at them, quite a few of them are, fairly red-leaning states. And then, of course, you have the other primaries, which some are partially open, partially closed. But essentially what happens in an open primary state is you're going to get handed two ballots. And so you're going to get handed the Democrat ballot and the Republican ballot. And you're going to have the choice to fill out one and throw the other one away. So what's happening in a lot of places that lean heavily Republican, so the Democrats know for sure that whichever Republican makes it through the primary is pretty much a shoo-in in the general election. They just don't run any candidates on their side. Like, they'll run them, but they'll run this guy versus himself, and then that guy versus himself. And so you pick up the Democrat ticket and you're like, well, wait a sec. There's really no choices here. No, they're not primarying each other in the Democrat ticket. So then you look over at the Republican ticket and there are challengers in almost every single race. And so what's happening is, at least at a minimum, the Democrat voters are saying, well, there's no reason for me to vote in my own. I might as well vote over here in the Republican one and vote for the candidate that's most like me. In the worst case scenario, I would imagine they're probably running Democrats as Republicans, and then they cross over and vote for that guy. And so if you think about what a good strategy that is, because so few people pay attention, they'll pick up their ballot and they have no clue, it's this guy versus this guy. And, they might have no idea how, the person actually is on different issues. And so who knows why they're voting for one versus the other. But, if you just assume that maybe the two Republican candidates kind of split the vote or come close to splitting the vote, and then the Democrats switch over and they vote for their guy, then, that's a huge advantage. And so what happens is, a lot of the time, the statist or the liberal or whatever term you want to use, Republican, fake Republican, the Democrat running as a Republican, they end up winning. And, I was involved in a lot of Tea Parties around the state, and rarely did they get a candidate that won. In fact, most of their candidates, they all lost 2-1. And so it looked like a big blowout. Well, That's what this video is going to be about. I mean, I'm going to try to keep it as short as possible, so just stick with me. I'm going to give you just a very small example. And the reason why I'm going to do a small example is because, you got to have some of these conditions all set up for it to work. Like I say, you got to have Democrats that aren't really contesting themselves in their own primary. And so you're just going to have to go look at your own primary, see if this applies. And it might not apply election to election because, there's going to be some of those variables, but you'll know it's coming. if you're watching your primary system in your county or your city or your state, and the Democrats aren't running against each other, then it's coming. This is what happened in Ravalli County, Montana in the 2010 primary election. So you can see here the total votes cast was 10,047. So I'm going to give you a tight race. So this race everyone in the county could vote for him. So Kobe Smith, and you can see his numbers, versus Susie Foss. So really not that far apart. And that's a total of 7,495 votes. Now there was another race where there was actually 7,800 votes. And these are Republicans right here. So this race right here got 74.6% of the total primary voters. So if you really believe these numbers, then I guess Democrats don't engage in primaries. Only Republicans do. Because that would only leave like 25% of the voters to vote in the Democrat primary. But remember, there were other races that had more votes. Okay, so now this one's interesting. So Bill Fulbright, by himself, he had no primary opponent. He got 6,100 votes, which is 61%, essentially. And so look, you can see there's a gap right there already. Like, where did those voters go? How come they didn't vote here too? Well, because there was nobody to cross over and vote for. They just don't like this guy. So now here's his actual opponent, really. The Democrat county attorney, George Korn. Look at that. Only 1,571 people voted for him, which ended up only being 15.64% of the total primary voters. That's crazy, especially when you look at these numbers. So here's the general election. George Korn versus Bill Fulbright. Look at that. All of a sudden, George Korn goes from 15% to almost 45% of the voters. And then Fulbright over here, he's got 53%. So if you take a look at that real close, I think you can see what's going on here. And so, is it possible here that Susie Foss was really the Democrat candidate? I think it's possible. We were trying to repeal the growth policy to stop zoning, which we were successful in doing. And her husband was, he was against that. He did not want to repeal the growth policy. So the Democrats were the ones pushing the zoning super hard, and they wanted it real bad. So Susie might have been their girl. She did fool a lot of people, but anyways, there was a lot of tight legislative races, other races. But yeah, they're jumping over and they're messing in these Republican primaries. Obviously, this was pretty noticeable. So the Ravalli County Republican Central Committee decided that it would be in their best interest to, try to close these primaries so that they could actually get their candidates through. So anyways, they ended up suing. And so here's the petition for writ, and it's in the United States Court of Appeals, Ninth Circuit. Okay, so in this lawsuit, there's a deposition, and the deposition is of Eric Fever, and he's the president of the Montana Federation of Public Employees. And he basically oversaw the consolidation of rival teachers and public sector workers unions into the largest union in Montana. And so essentially what he was doing is he was advising people in his union to not vote in the Democratic primaries and actually cross over and vote in the Republican primaries. So this is actually, so now I showed you the numbers. Now I'm going to show you an instance where somebody, I guess, got caught, but he's actually just being honest. Like, he's actually honest about what he's been doing. Because, I mean, there's nothing really illegal about it. So here's the question he's asked in his deposition. What was the purpose of directing Democratic members in the union to vote in the Republican primaries? There's some objections and stuff, but he says, I'm thinking they should vote Republican if they're interested in supporting the candidates we've endorsed. But apparently, the attorney had found a quote, and so he's kind of asking, asking this quote in a question form. But here's part of the quote in question form. But Republicans should own their own party, but if it's going to fracture along some ideological fissure points, I'd prefer that the folks that fracture against our interests are in the minority in the Republican Party, and insofar as I can make that happen, I'll make that happen. Kind of in conclusion, I think there's a couple different factors going on. I think naturally voters are crossing over into Republican primaries because, like I say, there's really nobody to vote for in the Democrat primaries the way those guys are setting it up. And then you have powerful people like this who are actually encouraging people to cross over. And so if this guy's doing it, then potentially there's going to be a lot of other people doing it. I mean, this is just one example that people have found out. So I guess we're down to solution time. I don't know that I have a great solution for it. I mean, I think if the Republican Party wants to have more constitutional people in government, then they might have to just look at this playbook and follow it. If you're going to run, it would probably be wise of you to have one of your friends run in the same office in the Democrat Party. Make them stay home, defend their own territory. And then secondarily, I mean, it is possible, I suppose, that, some of these people who are running in the Democrat Party might win. In the Republican Party, they have a thing called Republican in name only. They call them rhinos. In the Libertarian Party, they're linos. But in the Democrat Party, they don't really have dinos. And I think it's because, I hate to say it, but they're just a lot better at playing this game. Republicans aren't running as Democrats, but I suspect that Democrats are running as Republicans. And so, if you don't start getting a little bit smarter with your strategies, then, almost every Republican's going to be Mitt Romney. So, instead of Rand Paul. So if you want to change it, you're going to have to get a little smarter. I don't even know if closing the primaries is really going to help, because you could close the primaries and then they just register Republican. And so I don't know that really solves it. I think what you have to do is just have as many constitutional candidates running as possible, and you should run them in every party. You should run them in the Libertarian Party, you should run them in the Republican Party, and you should run them in the Democrat Party. Because, to be honest, I mean, under this theory, a lot of the time, once the Republican makes it through the primary, he's basically a Democrat. So if that situation happens, they need to have a Libertarian there to at least, have some sort of good commentary in the debates, somebody who's going to at least push some freedom and point out, the fallacies of these other candidates. So anyways, your thoughtful comments are welcome below. Obviously, I don't have all the answers. I'm just kind of showing you one of the problems. So anyways, we gotta do something so that we don't just keep sliding down into this tyranny. I mean, it seems like no matter which party's in office, we just never really get liberty back. It just kind of slides away from us just a little bit at a time. So there's something wrong. I think this is it. I think this is a real big key to it. So yeah, take a look at your local elections. Take a look at the numbers. If you see this going on, then get with your buddies and organize. Do something about it. All right, thanks for watching, guys.
We need a government that can fit inside of our Constitution.